She didn't come for the tournament. She came for her. She didn't come for the rankings. She didn't come to be photographed. Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, one of the most powerful leaders in Europe, walked into the Foro Italico on May 11, 2026 for one reason and one reason only: to watch a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines play tennis. That sentence alone should stop you in your tracks. Because in the entire history of the Italian Open, no sitting head of government had ever shown up specifically to watch a single player. Not a final, not a ceremony, not a political event. Just a quarterfinal match. Just a girl ranked 42nd in the world. Just Alex Eala. To understand why this moment hit so differently, you have to understand what Rome had already become by that point. For 2 straight weeks, the Foro Italico, an ancient stadium built in the Mussolini era, lined with marble statues and draped in Italian history, had been quietly, steadily transforming. With every round Alex Eala won, more Philippine flags appeared in the stands. More Filipino voices filled the air. The chant, Laban Eala, Fight Eala, had become the unofficial soundtrack of the tournament. It bounced off marble, it echoed across stone, it refused to die. Rome had adopted Alex Eala, and she had turned this ancient city into something that felt like home for an entire diaspora scattered across Europe and beyond. But May 11th was different. The energy was sharper, the stakes were higher. Because Eala wasn't facing just any opponent. She was stepping onto the Centrale court against Elena Rybakina, world number 2, the most dominant server on the WTA Tour that season. The analysts had already written it off. Eala gets steamrolled, shakes hands, exits gracefully. Clean, quick, predictable. Nobody told Alex. And apparently nobody told the Prime Minister either. Because Meloni didn't come to watch a one-sided defeat. She came because she already knew something the analysts didn't. That what was happening on that court, in that city, in that tournament was bigger than tennis. It was a story about people, about belonging, about a young woman carrying the weight of millions on her shoulders and not buckling under a single gram of it. If stories like this move you, stories that go beyond the scoreline, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Pro Tennis 360. We'll be here every time sport becomes something more. The road to Rome. How Alex Eala earned her place on that court. Before we get to the Prime Minister, before we get to the press conference that shook the room, before we get to the moment that traveled from Rome to Manila in under an hour, we need to talk about how Alex Eala even got there. Because nothing about her path to that quarterfinal was easy. Nothing was handed to her. Every single point was earned in blood, sweat, and a refusal to accept the word finished. Her run began with a match that should have broken her. 3 brutal sets against Magdalena Frech. Eala was down 3-1 in the deciding set, a moment where most players start mentally calculating flight times home. She didn't. She saved 9 of 10 breakpoints. 9. She clawed back game by game, held her nerve when the match was slipping, and found a way to win when every statistical probability said she shouldn't. That win alone would have been enough to write about. But Eala wasn't done. Next up was Wang Xinyu, the 31st seed, a player who had beaten Eala in Auckland earlier that year. That loss had clearly stayed with her. You could see it in how she played, not with desperation, but with something colder, more precise. She dismantled Xinyu in straight sets, clinical, focused, and old score quietly settled. By the time she walked out to face Rybakina, Eala's world ranking had already jumped from 42 to 38 just from this tournament alone. She was playing the best tennis of her life. Her movement was sharper, her decision-making faster. The shots that had failed her in previous years were landing with consistency she'd never shown before. But rankings and statistics only tell part of the story. What the numbers can't capture is the weight she was carrying, not as a burden, but as fuel. Behind her in the stands were thousands of Filipinos who had traveled from across Europe. Nurses finishing night shifts, engineers on weekend flights, OFWs who had saved up just to be in that stadium, just to cheer for someone who looked like them, who spoke like them, who carried their story in every step she took across that clay. She wasn't just playing for a trophy, she was playing for proof. Rybakina, the wall Alex Eala had to climb. Let's be honest about what Alex Eala walked into. Elena Rybakina is not just a top 10 player. She is, in many ways, the hardest matchup in women's tennis. Her serve is a weapon unlike anything else on tour, flat, heavy, precise, and in Rome that season, she had recorded 6 aces in the match with 0 double faults. That's not good, that's surgical. The analytics going into that match were brutal for Eala. Rybakina's first serve percentage sat above 68%. Her return games were dominant. She had dropped just 1 set in the entire tournament going into the quarterfinal. The consensus among commentators was respectful but clear. Eala had done brilliantly to get this far, but this was the end of the road. Then the match started, and Eala didn't look like someone who had read those previews. From the opening game, she was stepping inside the baseline, a high-risk strategy against a server like Rybakina, but the only way to neutralize that pace. Instead of letting the ball bounce deep and play defensively, Eala was taking it early, redirecting it before Rybakina could set up her next shot. It was technically demanding and physically exhausting, and it was working. By the end of the first set, Eala had fired 13 winners, her highest tally in a single set all tournament. She had Rybakina wrong-footed multiple times. She was forcing errors out of a player who simply doesn't make errors. The crowd, already electric, was reaching a new level of noise with every point. The 9th game of the first set became the defining sequence. Rybakina serving, Eala earning a break point. A 12-shot rally that had both players covering the full width of the court. Eala dragging Rybakina wide, then wider, creating an opening. And when that short ball finally floated up, she unloaded a forehand down the line that landed flush on the baseline. Rybakina didn't even move. Break. Silence from the Rybakina corner. Eruption from the Philippine flags in the stands. In the front row, Giorgia Meloni's eyes went wide. The Prime Minister leans forward. What Meloni saw in Alex Eala. There's a moment in the match, documented by multiple cameras, where Giorgia Meloni leans over to the official seated beside her. Her voice is quiet, but the cameras pick up just enough. "She's not afraid of her," Meloni says. And the official replies, almost with a smile, "No, she never is." That exchange tells you everything about why Meloni was there. Because Meloni is a politician who has spent her career being underestimated, challenged, counted out by people who assumed she couldn't survive the room she walked into. She knows what it looks like to be the person nobody expects to win. She knows what it costs to refuse to fold when the weight of the moment is designed to crush you. And in Alex Eala, on that clay court in Rome, she saw a mirror. Eala had held serve against everything Rome could throw at her. The pressure of the home crowd, which should have been hostile, but instead had adopted her. The weight of a nation watching from thousands of miles away. The rankings gap, the serve, the history. She absorbed all of it and gave nothing back but tennis. Rybakina, to her credit, responded the way champions do. She broke right back, leveled the set, pushed it to a tiebreak. Experience won out, 7-4, and the second set followed a heartbreaking pattern. Eala fought back, broke serve, leveled it at 3-3 while the flags waved and the chants grew louder. But Rybakina reeled off 3 straight games, match over, 6-4, 6-3. On paper, it's a loss, but consider the numbers beneath the score. 32 unforced errors forced out of the world number 2. 17 from Eala. Multiple breaks of what is arguably the best serve on the women's tour. 1 hour and 32 minutes of relentless, fearless tennis. Alex Eala walked off that court with her head high. Every person in that stadium knew they had witnessed something. The score didn't capture it, the rankings didn't capture it. But the woman sitting in the front row, the Prime Minister of Italy, understood it perfectly. Before the handshake was even complete, she had already made a decision. I need to meet her. The private suite, 20 minutes that changed everything. They found Eala a private suite overlooking the empty court. She was still processing. The match had ended 20 minutes earlier, but her mind was clearly still out there on that clay, replaying shots, moments, the tiebreak, that third set. Still in the arena, even though the arena had emptied. Meloni was already there, standing at the window, back to the door, looking out over the court where the match had just been played. When Eala entered, she turned, extended her hand, and skipped every formality that a sitting prime minister would typically observe in an official meeting. "I watched every point," Meloni said. "Not just the tennis, the way you carried yourself, the way that crowd responded to you, the way you refused to fold." She paused. "That's rare, and that's why I'm here." Eala's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Prime Minister. Call me Giorgia. We're both fighters. We don't need titles." 20 minutes. That's how long they talked. Away from cameras, away from microphones, away from the noise of the press room and the tournament and the world outside. Nobody recorded it. Nobody live tweeted it. It was just two women. One at the beginning of a career that could redefine a sport. One who had spent decades redefining a country, sitting together in a quiet room above an empty tennis court, talking. We don't know everything that was said in that room. What we know is what came after. What we know is that when Meloni walked out of that suite and into the press room, something had shifted. The careful, calibrated political language she was expected to use had been replaced by something raw, something more honest, something she had clearly been thinking about since the first time she'd heard "Le Bon Alex" echo off the marble of the Foro Italico. The press room was packed. Journalists with their notepads and recorders, expecting the usual diplomatic niceties. A few quotes about the beauty of sport, the value of international friendship, the excellence of the competition. Standard. What they got was something entirely different. The press conference. Words that made a room go silent. Meloni walked to the microphone and didn't flinch. "I have watched many athletes compete in this country," she began. "Footballers lifting World Cups, cyclists conquering the Giro d'Italia, champions across every sport you can name." The room was quiet. Journalists leaning forward, pens ready, waiting for the pivot to diplomatic boilerplate. It never came. Meloni's gaze drifted toward the doorway where Eala stood just out of frame, and her voice, steady, measured, carrying the weight of everything she clearly meant, continued. "But I have never seen anything like what Alex Eala brought to Rome this week. The flags, the chants, the fight. Not for a trophy, not for a ranking, for her people." Silence. In any other context, silence at a press conference means the speaker has lost the room. This was the opposite. This was a room so collectively stunned that no one wanted to break it with the sound of a keyboard or a shifting chair. Every camera stayed fixed. Every journalist sat still. "Italy has always been built by those who arrived from somewhere else," Meloni continued. "Workers, immigrants, dreamers who left everything behind to build something new. The Filipino community here, the nurses, the caregivers, the engineers, they are part of our story. And in Alex Eala, they have found a hero." There was a pause, not for effect. The kind of pause a person takes when they know that what comes next is the most important thing they're going to say. Then, Meloni said, she dropped it. "The Italian government will establish a special cultural exchange program between Italy and the Philippines funded by a grant of 500,000 euros in Alex Eala's name to support young Filipino athletes who dream of training here, just as she trained in Mallorca." The room gasped. Not the polite, controlled reaction of journalists trying to maintain professional distance, a real, involuntary, audible intake of breath that traveled across the room like a wave. 500,000 euros.
in her name, for the next generation. Eala at the microphone. The speech nobody planned. In the wings, Eala stood frozen. The tears came before the applause finished. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't been told what Meloni was going to say. Nobody had prepared her for this. When the room erupted and the journalists, not as a performative gesture, but as a spontaneous, unanimous response, rose to their feet before she had even reached the microphone, she stopped walking for a moment, just stood there, overwhelmed. Then she gathered herself, the way she had gathered herself on every court, in every tiebreak, in every moment this tournament where the pressure had peaked and the obvious thing to do was fold. She walked to the microphone. "I came to Rome to play tennis," she began. Her voice cracked on the word tennis. She stopped, breathed. The room waited. "I leave this." She looked out at the packed press room, at the cameras, at the journalists still standing, at the faces of people who had flown in from Manila, from Milan, from Brussels, Filipino community members who had somehow found their way into the back rows of that press conference, holding each other's hands. "This grant is not for me," she said. "It's for every Filipino who has ever felt far from home, for every young athlete who dreams bitter than their circumstances, for every OFW who sacrifices everything so their children can have a future they couldn't." Her voice broke completely on that last line. "Thank you, Italy. Thank you for seeing us." The room wept. There's no other word for it. Journalists who had covered Grand Slams, World Cups, Olympic ceremonies, people professionally trained to observe without reacting, were visibly struggling. Cameras captured every frame. And somewhere in the back of that room, standing slightly apart from the official delegation, Giorgia Meloni watched.
She leaned over to her aide and said quietly, "She's something special." The aide replied, "She's just getting started." From Rome to Manila, how the world heard the news. Within hours, it was everywhere. Not trending, not viral in the casual algorithmic sense, where something bubbles up briefly and disappears. This was different. This was news interrupting news. Philippine television broke into regular programming. Anchors who had been covering political stories, economic updates, the usual rotation of daily headlines, they stopped, live, on air, to tell their audiences what had happened in Rome. Some of them struggled to hold it together on air. The social media numbers were staggering. Millions of posts within the first 6 hours. The hashtags Alex Eala Grant, Italy Loves Philippines, Laban Alex didn't just trend in the Philippines. They trended globally. In the United States, in the United Kingdom, in the Gulf states where hundreds of thousands of OFWs work. The story traveled instantly through community group chats, family WhatsApp threads, Facebook pages that had been following Eala's run for weeks. Alex Eala became the most searched name in the Philippines for 48 straight hours, not because of a match result, because of what she had made possible. The coverage wasn't just sports coverage. Political journalists were writing about Meloni's speech. Cultural commentators were writing about diaspora identity and what it means for an immigrant community to be seen, publicly, officially, by a head of state, in a country where they've spent years working quietly, invisibly, at the margins of society. Economists were analyzing the grant structure. Educators were already speculating about which young Filipino athletes might be the first to benefit. None of it had been planned. None of it was orchestrated. It had happened because a 20-year-old woman had walked onto a tennis court and refused to play small. Back in Rome, in a piazza not far from the Foro Italico, a group of Filipinos had gathered. Nurses, kitchen workers, domestic caregivers, people who had come to Italy with dreams packed into suitcases and had built quiet, dignified lives in a country that didn't always make them feel welcome.
Among them was a woman named Maria, who had been in Rome for 8 years. She had been courtside days earlier holding a handmade sign. Now she stood in the piazza, surrounded by her community, tears running down her face. 8 years I've been here, she said. 8 years. I have never felt seen like this. What 6-4, 6-3 actually means, rewriting the definition of victory. The scoreboard read 6-4, 6-3. Elena Rybakina advanced to the semifinals. Alex Eala did not win the Italian Open. Let's be precise about that, because precision matters when you're talking about sport. The match was lost. Rybakina won, 2-0. Clean on paper. But here's what else the numbers say, numbers that don't appear on any official scorecard. 32 unforced errors forced out of the world number 2 in 92 minutes of tennis. For context, Rybakina's average unforced error count against lower-ranked opponents that season was 14. Eala nearly doubled it. She didn't just lose the match, she made the second-best player on the planet work harder than almost anyone else had managed all year. 17 unforced errors from Eala, against a player whose serve alone generates more errors than almost any other weapon in the women's game. Multiple breaks of the Rybakina serve in a single match, something that had happened exactly twice all season before Rome. Eala's ranking moved from 42 to 38 in a single week. But the trajectory behind that number tells a deeper story. 2 years prior, she had been ranked outside the top 100.
A year prior, she had been bouncing between the top 60 and 70. Now she was dismantling top 30 opponents in straight sets and pushing world number 2 to her absolute limit. The direction of travel is unmistakable. More importantly, and this is the thing that gets lost in the immediate aftermath of a loss, is what she demonstrated about who she is as a competitor. You can learn almost nothing about a player from watching them win comfortably. You learn everything about them watching them lose, how they respond to pressure, whether they shrink or grow under the weight of expectation, whether the crowd's energy lifts them or paralyzes them. For 92 minutes in Rome, against the most clinical player on tour, watched by a sitting head of government, carrying the emotional weight of an entire diaspora, Alex Eala grew. Years from now, when the next generation of Filipino athletes trains on Italian clay, supported by a grant bearing her name, they won't be thinking about that scoreline. They'll be thinking about what she proved on the way to it. The Eala Effect, and it's just getting started. I came to Rome to play tennis, she said. I leave with a legacy, a chance for other Filipino kids to chase their dreams. That's bigger than any match. That's bigger than any tournament. She smiled through the tears when she said it, and she was right. There's a phrase that's been circulating in Filipino communities online ever since Rome, the Eala Effect. It started as a hashtag, the way these things always start, but it has since taken on a meaning that extends well beyond tennis, beyond sport, beyond any single tournament result. The Eala Effect is what happens when one person refuses to play within the limits others set for them, and in doing so, quietly expands what's possible for everyone watching. It's the Filipina nurse in Rome who cried in a piazza because a head of state finally said, in front of the world, "You are part of our story." It's the 10-year-old in Manila watching a live stream at midnight, holding a racket she bought secondhand, thinking for the first time, maybe. It's the OFW in Dubai sending the video to every family group chat with a single message, "Nakita tayo." They saw us. It's the Italian journalist who came to the press conference expecting diplomatic pleasantries and left having witnessed something that will appear in the first chapter of a book about this era of women's tennis. What Giorgia Meloni understood, sitting in that front row, watching a 20-year-old refuse to be outmatched, is what sports has always been capable of at its best. Not just competition, not just entertainment, but proof. Proof that the story isn't over. Proof that the underdog chapter doesn't always have to end the same way. Proof that showing up, fully, without apology, with everything you have, can change the rooms you walk into, even rooms you didn't know you'd be invited to. Alex Eala didn't win the Italian Open, but she won something the Italian Open has never given anyone before. And the scoreboard doesn't have a column for that. If this is the kind of story that moves you, if you believe tennis is more than a sport, and that players like Alex Eala deserve to be seen, subscribe to Pro Tennis 360. We cover every point, every moment, every story that goes beyond the scoreline. Because the Eala Effect is just getting started, and you don't want to miss what comes next.